Candidate is stealing ducks when you are stealing fowls.
As High Commissioner, I was wrong. As Charandas Prasad, I reacted naturally how any person would have.
I did not come here for that kind of abuse. I did not come here for that kind of abuse. If you're going to go along that road, I'll walk off.
But it's all okay once they're talking. If they weren't talking, I could not have been here today.
You got ADHD.
I got that.
Calm down.
I think I've done enough in terms of taking our team out of trouble from losing.
Come on, Lou Taylor. That's good. I'm reading the script now, and the first person that comes to my mind to play a detective,
Yes,
but an erratic detective, is Mikhail Rodriguez.
Why an African slap an Indian? Why a man and slap a woman? No, Gildarie, you deal with that. You deal with that.
We must encourage platforms like this because it brings together different people and allows for discussions to take place in our country on a multiplicity of fundamental issues.
Gildarie, you apologizing for something you think I did is wrong. I don't want you to do that, and you should not have done that. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are, because of different time zone. You are watching the live program of the Gildarie Freddie Kissoon show. We come to you Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Please make a note of that. It's not every night. Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 8:30 p.m. As you would know, wherever you are, if you follow things in Guyana, tomorrow is a very important day in the calendar of civilization, not the calendar of Guyana. It is the day that emancipation from slavery came about. Now, that may be so, it may be very, very, very relevant to Guyana, but it's also relevant to the world. My column tomorrow, which is on emancipation, says unapologetically, and I am unapologetic about it. And as a trained academic, I will argue in any forum about it. Slavery was the worst tragedy in the history of civilization. Nothing can compare to it, and you should not descend to the level of either ethnic or intellectual vulgarity to compare any other event since civilization began to slavery. It is unimaginable what slavery was. People may have their own reason for speaking often about the Holocaust and whatever, the Second, the First World War, but the human tragedy of civilization is slavery. And the countries that perpetuated slavery owe an enormous debt of reparation to the ex-slaves. And let's hope the world keep pressuring those powerful nations that benefited from slavery to do what is morally right. So our program this evening is on emancipation, and we have, that you will agree, two very high-profile African Guyanese who have been writing, talking, discussing, appearing on symposium and platforms about the African condition. They are high-profile African rights activists, and they are unapologetic when they say they are African. One of that person tonight in this studio, this is his fourth appearance, and that is 007 James Bond. The other person is his second appearance, and I've known him since I was 18, and I would venture to say, without fear of contradiction, perhaps the longest serving Pan-Africanist in the Caribbean, certainly in the Caribbean. Well, that would make him the longest serving Pan-Africanist in Guyana. Before I hand over to my co-host Leonard Gildarie. We have a little thing to do in the studio this evening. So follow me and I will ask the operator to pan the camera to the entire table and see what I'm going to do now. So I'm going into my bag here.
We breaking bread tonight?
You just
breaking bread tonight?
please shut your mouth. You will see who this is a compliment.
Somebody please bring plates.
The man is come prepared. The man is come prepared. The man said, don't say anything. Man said, don't say anything.
Is this Chinaware?
This is mine. Now, tissues. Please pass, James. You don't hear the basis of what I'm doing yet.
No. Circus never ends.
No.
Thank you.
You better don't let people hear you talking about emancipation. They will. Good. So, I am going to open this now. And
for the records, I had absolutely nothing to do with this.
You will see who has to do with this. Pass.
Spoon.
Pass. Well, pass. Now, I am going to cut this conky.
Nice.
I am going to tell you who sent this conky and what he wants the two African gentlemen here to do. He said that he trusts the judgment of African Guyanese. So he doesn't want Gildarie opinion or my opinion. No. Let's cut this conky and let me tell you what. Please take your knife, your spoon.
Yes. Thank you. That's fine.
Thank you.
Good.
Freddie Kissoon, make sure you get big, please. I'm a co-host.
Thank you. Good. David Hines ordered this conky from an Indian woman. Mm-hmm. He said he wants James Bond and Dalgety, his two Africans, to pronounce on the taste of this conky because he's been accused of not wanting to buy black pudding from Indian people. Now he wants to know if James Bond and Dalgety says this conky is good, then he will buy black pudding from Indian people and he will buy conky from Indian people. Now, let me taste it first in case you think David has done anything to it. Look. No, he doesn't want my opinion, but I'm going to say this conky is really, really great. Now, you would not believe it. My mother was a practicing Hindu, and she made conky. I married into a Muslim family. My mother-in-law was a practicing Muslim, and she made conky. When you really look at it, there's so much overlapping between these two major races. You don't know why they're suspicious of each other. But David Hines will eat black pudding from Indian people and conky. Mm-hmm. If James Bond and Dalgety approve of this conky, so can we ask the cameraman to switch to our two guests, please? Is this conky all right, James Bond?
Very all right, man.
Well, I can disagree. The first thing, conky is, you gotta put in that banana sucker leaf. That's the first thing.
Right.
Then the second thing is the text is a bit tough. You could taste the grains. I know when my grandmother and mom make conky, and Aunt Vicky Solomon make conky, they need that corn flour. It was so good. And I never see conky with raisins. That's a first for me. That's a first for me. It never had raisins inside. Mm-hmm. So it could pass, but it's a little stiff. I mean, like, we need that thing really, really good. So for me,
David should not eat black.
No, he could eat black from anybody. That's his choice, but don't base it because they conky.
No, the man is saying if it can pass, I would not eat black pudding and conky.
All right, good. All right, good. If you give it a passing grade, it's palatable. You can eat it, but they might get 50% from me. You remember, I cook too, and I've experienced good conky. I've experienced really good conky, and probably that's why. Did he suck a leaf? It was kneaded well and everything. And again, we never see raisins in that thing. It's the first time I'm seeing conky with raisins. I get 50%.
Last Tom Dalgety.
Well,
is this conky all right?
For me, I always ate what my mother put before me. Okay, therefore, once it came before me, I will eat it, right? And it tastes all right. I must confess that I've been to Ghana and had conky, and we put sugar in our conky, but in Ghana they put salt. You know, so the conky in West Africa, at least in Ghana, is different from the conky in the diaspora. I think there's something else, and this is corn flour, isn't it?
The corn flour, yeah. You gotta knead it a bit more. I gotta soak a bit more. So the grains are not so grainy. You see, it's not just mixing and then baking. You gotta mix that in. Mix that in so the grains dissolve. So when you eat it, it's like some fluff.
Yeah, but you mean it has to be ground up a bit more.
But don't. I hope David Hines wouldn't sue me. But
I will eat all of this.
Yeah, it's palatable. It's palatable. It's palatable. It's palatable.
Gildarie, please eat the lady's conky.
No, you were asking me to make...
we gone beyond
so I can eat it out now?
Conky. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're watching the show, our guest this evening is none other than 007 James Bond, perhaps one of the most controversial Guyanese in the sociology and politics of Guyana, and the enduring figure in Pan-Africanism. Ras Tom Dalgety, we are discussing this evening the African people in Guyana, the African condition, African philosophy, African politics. We are discussing this evening African civilization in Guyana, and I will hand over to my co-host Leonard Gildarie for him to take James Bond and Ras Tom Dalgety into the journey of African sociology. Over to Guyana's enduring journalist, Leonard Gildarie.
Thank you very much, dear Freddie, and good night, folks. It's been a pleasure. When the show started, I thought that Freddie was the beneficiary of government's grants for small businesses. I thought that he was getting into, people would sell perfumes and things like that, and he started out his business, but not knowing that he borrowed somebody's bag. Whatever it is, we must extend our gratitude towards Dr. David Hines. The significance of such a gesture of reaching out and buying it and wanting it to appear here is not lost on me, and I'm sure on the gentleman that is sitting here.
Excuse me, that was just a joke.
Oh, you didn't say that was a joke? But you were serious? I believe that. But if that is not the case, I hope that Dr. David Hines is listening, and that maybe that could be extended. Whatever it is, I remember making conky with my grandmother in Edmore, and the soccer leaf and the pointer brooms and things like that came in pretty handy. And you got to use a lot of pumpkin.
Yeah.
You have to use it, and it was the texture, it's almost smooth to the rubbery kind of thing. So I know a lot about conky, but whatever it is good. For a long time I didn't had it. And however it tasted, passing, I would say 50-60% thereabouts, and I'm happy. I'm also happy tonight, looking at the panel here. Two things I must point out to you. We were having a conversation just before the show, and Mr. Bond says that he's happy, or what he found a little strange. Significant is that the Indian brother wished him early emancipation greetings. And I said to him, I'm not Indian. And there's a reason for that, and I wanted to share. I've always viewed myself, I had a Chinese grandfather, and my cousins are Amerindian. My eldest son happened to be Afro-Guyanese. He's in Holland right now studying law. I've never viewed myself as anything, and maybe there's going to be a lot of disagreements with that, except Guyanese. And tonight, I'm extremely happy that we could sit here as a country which is moving in the right direction, and sit with the people intelligent people, people who have their own following, and we could have a discussion about the future of Guyana. We could delve into things and analyze this country, dissect it. James Bond has quite a following. Tom himself has been around for a very, very long time, made significant input with his work in Guyana. Is this a reflection of where this country should be? I would say definitely a big yes, 120% yes, 1000% yes. These are the things that we have to live for. Why are we not? I'm going to jump right into it. The gentleman, James, why is it a political thing that people are pushing, an angle they're pushing, but they're saying, oh, people are not getting along? Is it a myth? Is this a myth?
All right. Thanks for having me again, Uncle Freddie. Leonard, thanks for having me. And my senior, my elder, it's good seeing you, Mr. Dalgety. Mr. Dalgety and I share the same community background, the same roots. And I grew up knowing him, seeing him, and it's an honor to be here with him today.
Thanks very much.
And I remarked to Leonard that the first person that wished me happy emancipation was an Indian brother. Must say shout out to PY Taxi Service. Davy, my sister, it was one of her drivers. He came to bring something. He shook my hand, and he's surprised. He says, "Happy emancipation, Mr. Bond." I was says, "Thanks, brother." I got excited, because these things let me know that the African experience, the Black experience, is respected, and it was so heartening to hear Mr. Kissoon, a scholar of no mean artist, say that the Holocaust was the worst tragedy to happen, and recognize the need for reparations. Slavery, and recognize the need for reparations. I think people do not understand the impact of what slavery did, and I would recommend a simple book, not simple book, but a book that is readable, easy to read and understand. How Europe and Developed Africa by our own Dr. Walter Rodney. And he used some very strong language to describe what transpired. So it is good to see that it is recognized by all the races in Guyana of what happened to Guyanese of African descent. And the existence of the races, I say one thing, it is the division is politically driven, and it has mostly always been politically driven. But we must do whatever it is within our power to continue preaching for the coexistence, the peaceful coexistence of our peoples, irrespective of political belief. And but front and foremost, front and center, emancipation. What happened up to 1834, apprenticeship 1838, I think we could reflect on that. But again, reflection is one thing. I believe that we must have a more solid discussion of where do people of African descent or Black people, not just in Guyana, but the diaspora around the world. I mean, how do we recover what was lost during those years? I think that's particularly of concern to me as a person of African descent, Black Guyanese. So that's my bit.
Sorry, you don't.
Was Tom Dalgety. I first met him when I was 18 years at a Pan-African conference in Bishop's High School. And I think if anyone in this country can speak about African people and where they're going in Guyana, it has to be, if anyone, that group or that select set of people who have the experience and the authority to talk about emancipation, African Guyanese. It will be our senior here, our senior activist. Tom, where are African Guyanese going? Are you comfortable with what they have achieved so far in Guyana and in the diaspora?
That's a difficult question to answer. I call myself African, period. Okay, I don't have any mix up with that, and that's because I have a heritage that I know of, right? My mother, or my mother's father and mother were black. My father's mother was black. In fact, she was. I have her baptism certificates of 1878 or 1879, and therefore, really, I grew up with a almost total African heritage. My parents belonged to the Negro Progress Convention. My mother won a Best Speakers Prize in 1934 through the Negro Progress Convention. And we have always been basically grew up within a belief of Africanness and so on and so forth. So I don't have a problem with my in terms of identity of where I am. Okay, the African peoples are they've made some progress, but I think there's a long way still to go. They've made some progress. We've seen the history. The first Pan-African conference was in 1900, called by Henry Sylvester Williams. Following that, there was Marcus Garvey, and there was Du Bois, and there was the guy from Trinidad. What's the guy from Trinidad name? Can't remember the name. Not C.L.R. James. He's buried within Nkrumah in Ghana. He actually lived for a little while in the Soviet Union and actually used to send arms down to Africa for the liberation of Africa. That was in, but he had a break with Stalin and so on and so forth. But African peoples now are under some stress. I mean, look at what's happening in Africa now with the wars in Sudan. There is the trouble in South Africa itself and in the Congo and around. And I think for myself that even us in the diaspora will not really be liberated until Africa is liberated. I don't think so. I think if you look at what's happened in the rest of the world with the China and India and so on and so on and so forth, that we have a long way, and our duty really now is to look for is to help in the liberation of Africa. That's what I think. So I think we have some way to go. If you look at the emancipation tomorrow, and I walked with a little a printout actually of a sugar factory in 1694, right? Sugar factory in 1694 sugar factory. Now, basically we came here and did sugar, okay? Coffee and other things, but the main export was in sugar. And it is sugar not being paid for the work we did in sugar, and the technology came from Africa, okay? If you read the old textbooks, they may say that it's Egyptian technology, but it's not Egyptian technology, it's African technology, The matter of, in fact, sugarcane itself is only grown in tropical countries, it's not grown in Europe, right? But Europeans began to have a sweet mouth, a sweet tooth, and therefore they fell in love with the tropical foods around about the 15th, 16th century when they began to circle the world, and they began to love sugar, and therefore eventually they began the slave trade, and we end up. So when we say in a technical sense, when we speak about emancipation, we really mean about freedom that came about because of our work in sugar, in producing sugar for the European market, okay, and so on. So I sometimes look at things on that technical scale, and so on. So, but I think we have a long way to go, and I'm not very. I can't see that I'm satisfied with the progress taking place.
Gentlemen, and of course, you cannot talk about Afro-Guyanese or Indo-Guyanese in Guyana without rating the current government or any government, as a matter of fact, and what have they done to integrate our people. Mm-hmm. I look at the current government that we have here on the air finale, and I would want to ask you, and I refer specifically to moves to, and that was something I found pretty interesting from a faraway perspective. When I say faraway, looking on, going into places like Mock in a very aggressive manner, Agricola, Moxton, and I think the recent election would have shown us an all-out attempt to really get into Linden and so on. Would you say that they have made inroads? James, I come to you, and then maybe Tom, you could probably weigh in there too. Is this government doing more than any other government that would have been in the administration? Are they making progress? Are Afro-Guyanese better for it?
Well, first, I would like to discuss just for a few seconds the question that Mr. Kissoon posed to Dr. Dalgety, which is the state of the African. I won't speak to globally. I believe that in Guyana, we have come some way, but I must agree with him. We have far way to go. And again, it is a direct result. It is a direct result of the setback, the economic setback, the emotional setback of the 400 years of slavery. I don't think much has been done by any government, whether it's the colonial government or any government since, to really put on, in terms of equity and parity, the African Guyanese. There may have been attempts, but we have never. They were not successful attempts to actually not only recognize what happened to the African Guyanese, and I speak once we directly to the Guyana context, and it could be pushed over to wherever we find Africans in the diaspora, and even in Africa itself. But the point is equity and parity. It is impossible for us to say that a century has passed, 2 centuries have passed, and there has not been any corrective measures. For example, the slave owners were compensated. The slaves have not been compensated until today's date. Slave owners got millions because they lost their labor. But the laborers got nothing for their free labor. So we must understand that unless the African, except the black person, is given that equity and parity in some meaningful and tangible form, and reparations does this in some regard. But governments must, in my estimation, try to correct the psychological harm that slavery would have done. And why do I say this here? Africans, as we know, in Guyana, they started on the plantation. And then from the plantation, they shifted off. But when they shifted off to the plantation, they were not equipped. They were not given tools. They were not given the necessary energies to become successful off the plantation. Now that would have had a psychological impact on families in terms of generations. And I think governments must understand this aspect of it. Is that person that now you still see more the grouping that has most, that they live on lands with no titles, African Guyanese. African Guyanese who are skilled but still can't find jobs off the plantation, except on the plantation, the public service, African Guyanese. So now to answer your question, whether this government has done more than any other government, no. I wouldn't. I think the PNC, the first PNC years, under Forbes Barnum sought to bring some degree of parity, but you can't do that in a multi-ethnic society. I don't believe, and let me just make it clear, this is my personal belief. I believe in equity and parity, but I don't believe in favoritism. I think we're all here as Guyanese, and I don't think, because someone looks this particular way, that I should leapfrog them and give someone something, because we're all here now. It's probably a dicey thing to say. But what this government and other governments have not done is held the hand of the African Guyanese in certain regards. To open a business right now for an African, for a young black guy, a young black Guyanese, the red tape, the ticker tape, the red tape, the bureaucracy to open a business is not easy. And this is not just for a black Guyanese, it's across the board. But because a black Guyanese may not be oriented to business, he says, I don't want a piece of this. I don't want this hassle. So I think government has to put things in place which makes it easier with the sight that, you know what, this may affect this community more or this group of people more. Let me put certain systems in place.
Are you saying, James, because if I'm hearing you, are you saying that for the Indo-Guyanese, they're more, they have more common sense when it comes to business?
No.
And therefore, it can be easy to them and as versus Afro-Guyanese?
No. The word I use is orientation. For example, you grew up in a home, I grew up in a home where we were taught to get education, get a job.
Right.
We were nothing but business. Get a
cultural
job.
Perspective.
So East Indians, Chinese, Portuguese, they're oriented more towards business. African Guyanese is not oriented towards easy. First thing you get, why are you going to join the police force? Go join the soldiers.
Yeah, I think more. I don't think there is a sociologist that would disagree with that. The ethnic groups went into different orientations. Yes, I don't have a problem with
that. So I'm saying that governments must make it easier for this particular community. It will benefit all Guyanese at the end of the day. They're not saying, oh, this is just for African Guyanese.
Right.
All right, they're not saying this is just for you. But they're making the systems easier that this particular community that is under a more psychological deference to enter, it becomes easier for them along. They benefit because of the policy. So governments, again, they have not done that. And again, I want to make this clear. Governments don't care about poor people. And this government has shown that in certain effects, it doesn't care, because I say the largest place where African Guyanese live, work, and earn their wage is in the public service. Now you can't say, well, I'm going to do this or that for African Guyanese, and you're not doing this for the public service. So I've made a call for years to pay public servants a livable wage. This is not to pay African Guyanese. Whoever goes there, they'll benefit. So that's my point. It's across the board. So when Indo-Guyanese goes into the public service, he'll benefit. But it will benefit African Guyanese because they're in that space. So in terms of housing, no one could deny the programs that government has done has made it easier for all Guyanese to benefit, as well as African Guyanese to benefit from its housing programs. In terms of construction, I've seen a lot more African Guyanese in terms of getting contracts and doing works, which is commendable. So it's a dicey balance, but again, for the poor classes of African Guyanese, I don't think this government is not doing enough. And I think the only government I think would have done sufficient passing grade is the first PNC regime under Lyndon Forbes Sampson born, where housing, health, education, everything was across the board, and African Guyanese benefited as well as every other Guyanese benefited.
You know, I'm sitting in the company of a politician, and if I don't say a few words, then people wonder what the hell I'm doing here, You mentioned equity, and I also think that the government should do more in respect of equity. I mean, take contracts. One get the impression that that African Guyanese don't get as many contracts at the top level than the Indian Guyanese. At least there's a saying among that. Sometimes one would say it has to do with, you find that the African Guyanese have to do 3 or 4 contracts at a time, small contracts, and they don't get the big contracts. But on the question also of, I'm thinking of the spiritual aspects of culture and the government and so on and so forth. You see, one of the setbacks of the Africans is that they never really had a connection with Africa. The Indians have always had, when they what do we call it again? Getting old now. But they've all had envoys coming from India throughout the last century, okay? Making contact with India, with Indians, and making contact with the governors and so. And the governors really looked after the Indians more than the governors looked after the Africans. Africans were left to local government, that sort of thing. I'm thinking of Bagotville, for example. We had They were more to look after yourself. Whereas in this, I think so. I think that one can say quite clearly, in a certain sense, that they need more government input into the matter of lifting the Africans into equity position. We're not at equity at the moment. I don't think so. And it's happening both at the material level and at the spiritual level, right? I'm thinking of the spiritual level right now, in terms of I'm Rastafari, of course, and that's because in my own personal life I found that Christianity was holding me down in terms of wanting to become an independent, and therefore when Rastafari allowed me to move the Godhead from Europe and put it in Africa, it helped me become more daring and more bold and more so in a sense. But even at that level, for example, I wish the government will help the Rastas, for example, to build a few more tabernacles in this country, so that to adjust that spiritual. There's a weakness spiritually within the African community, At least I think so, that sort of thing. And there's need for more government input. I want to talk later on in the program, or sometime mention the program, this matter of naming street names and naming streets.
Go ahead. We may not, the time may run out. So,
I have an article here in which Peter Rose Street, he was a slave owner, and we still have the name Peter Rose now. He was co-owner of sugar and plantations, etc. And his partner was Mr. Crowell, that Crowell named after, And we should, in fact, just change these names to help to build the confidence of African people. We don't have names like that will build confidence and so among African people, And I once wrote this. I have an organization, the Confederation of African Nationals and Descendants. So it's really a branch off of London. And we have written the City Council about it. Now, I have put up some street signs around the place just to bring it to the awareness of the general public. I mean, I'm a fool. I don't think I could rename any city. So I write the City Council, and the City Council back it, But you could find places, especially in Burmese Calcutta and so on and so forth, that associate Indians with India. There's hardly any village, any community, any street that I could think of that Africans can associate with Africa, that sort of thing. I did write recently sort of.
But as you on that, and I just read that article too, right?
Mm-hmm. It's right here. Let's show the.
It is. If you're looking at it, this is what it is. It's 1823 insurrection. What is in the name? And it's by Thomas Harden, the guy that came and stayed by the Hardmanson Lodge, and he did some research into Peter Rose Street. Let me just break it down in a nutshell. And Crowell Street. And I want to ask you a question, Tom. Mm-hmm. Where are the Afro-Guyanese activists who would look at this? Because this thing, you have Peter Rose Street, a slave owner, who a street named after him, and 100 years later, the street still named Peter Rose. Yes. Crowell Street, one of the most used streets in Georgetown.
Yes. But Gildarie, the world is going in the opposite direction. The world is toppling statues of slave owners.
So where are the activists? Where are the voices?
But that's a good question. Where are the activists? Because I have tried to do it. Sometimes you mention names. For example, I think Ipaji should have done something where this is concerned. It doesn't cost money. It's not asking for money, but just approaching the government and asking the. Well, I did approach the City Council. But the City Council has to approach the government And maybe by talking here, something will happen with the Ministry of Culture, so on and so forth. I said, listen, emancipation also means mental emancipation, okay? Therefore, we can't keep these people oppressed with these slave names all the time, you know? It's 100 and something years. It's time, you know. I mean, the British conquered, called the place Peking, no? And the Chinese, this is Beijing.
The Indians have done that too. Kolkata instead of right.
Yeah. But I spent 2 months in Madras, okay? But it was named Madras any longer.
I know.
It's named Chennai.
Yeah,
you know,
Chennai.
The Indian government has done this thing to lift the mentality and the mental condition and give confidence to the people, right? But we are still being held as suppressed. And it doesn't cost much money.
I want to ask both of you, because the irony stares you in the face. The first black village in Guyana of emancipated slaves is named Victoria.
Yes.
Would you recommend changing the name?
Yes, I don't ask him before him. And in fact, an effort was made to do this. In fact, I have a friend named Gustav Jackson. He died. Okay, but he and I think there was a petition went around. Okay, to rename Victoria Village Kumasi after Kumasi in Ghana, but it just withered away and died. But I know of that effort to change the name from Queen Victoria to Kumasi.
Let me say this here. I'm not. I agree with what you're saying, but I like to have another view. I'm all for removing the remnants or the things that remind us of
those dark days,
of that period.
That reminds us of the worst human tragedy in history of civilization.
I'm all for it. But like I said in the program before, I like to move beyond symbolism. I love to move beyond symbolism.
Has to do with desires and hopes and whatnot. If you know, that is what symbolism has to do.
Yeah. This is
so
my
you
point.
can't really move beyond symbolism.
No, we must move beyond. There must be. But you could change the name of Victoria to Kumasi, to any other name, and the plight of the people of Victoria will still remain.
I do not accept that. No.
It's okay to disagree. I believe there must be aggressive policies that go beyond changing names. Changing names, I have no qualms with it. But there must be aggressive policies that go beyond changing the names. Why I say this? The people of African descent, unique worldwide, no single person could speak on behalf of all Africans. The experience is different. We were divided in Africa. The colonizers divided Africa, raped Africa, exploited the people of Africa. Take them to the countries in the diaspora, did the same thing. The symbols may remind us, but what would assist us is an aggressive policy that moves beyond the symbols. 1, education, financial education literacy. 2, family. These are the 2 things I think are missing. Why you make a point that there's no connection between Africans as there's India and China. I could tell you, you look at check it. There's a Miss India worldwide pageant. There's constant communication between India and Guyana, between China and Guyana. Only recently we see financial economic cooperation between Ghana and Guyana, but long before this, Guyana was fighting for the freedom of Africa, the liberation of Africa, the fall of apartheid. So in the issue of fighting for Africa, we've always done that. But that exchange of ideas, that exchange of resources, it has not been real and practical. So I think you mentioned, you know history from way back. So then the connectivity between the African must be, 1, in terms of financial literacy, and 2, in terms of family. We need a stronger family. And I recognize that's one of my own failings, something I admit to myself. In terms of how we teach and educate our family, our presence as African men or black men in our homes, that goes a long way more than symbolisms. Teaching our kids financial literacy about leaving inheritance and a legacy and working hard. does more than changing a name. So those two areas, I believe, the African experience could be much different for future generations if we focus on building back the family. Because what kept us together back in those days off of the plantation was when we were able to be with our own families, to grow our own families, and to work as a family unit. That's what slavery did to us more than anything else. Destroyed the family unit. And after slavery, we were given an opportunity now to resuscitate that family unit. And we were able to buy. It's families that came together and bought plantations, it wasn't individuals. The family structure, and I always say this, we've accomplished so much between 1834, 1838 and the early 19th century than before. And if you look at the most black inventors came from the period just after slavery, during slavery. Why is that so?
Are you talking American nonsense? Are you talking about Americans?
The black inventors, they succeeded. Businessmen, they succeeded. I'm saying this. The pressures of slavery, the pressures of Jim Crow, the pressures of segregation made Guyanese, make Africans in North America and even in Guyana to achieve a lot, to accomplish a lot. And I'm saying it was because of financial literacy, it was because of the family unit. We had that. And I would like to see us get back to that as an African people.
James and Ras, I have known both of you a long time. Of course, I've known Ras ages ago. And I don't think I've ever known any occasion where you feel constrained in expressing your views. So I don't feel constrained myself in carrying you in a direction which I think I would like the both of you to go. I'm asking both of you, if you think that there will be a greater, I want to use the correct word, if there will be more resources going into African Guyanese lives, I don't want to say African Guyanese constituency, I mean the lives of African Guyanese. If you had a more sedate, a more respectful relation between opposition and government, don't you think it would be to the benefit of African Guyanese? The opposition won over 200,000 votes. These people have a significant presence in Parliament. Don't you think it would have been, I'm asking you, if it would not have been more productive if the opposition adopts a more let's talk approach to the ruling party rather than a more aggressive mode? Don't you think the opposition...
Both have to reach out to each other, Both have to reach out to you. Not that the opposition must, some or the sort. Both have to reach out to each other. I don't think it can happen with just one party doing it. So the ruling party has to reach out also to the opposition and appreciate what their followers want, and so on and so forth, and help it along for the
okay, I know James is going to come in. What I'm going to say will add to his reaction.
I decided to
but don't you think I want to say this without any fear of contradiction. This is how I see it. I think President Orphan Ali is of the kind of Jaganite temperament that I think he'd be willing to sit down and talk. I think Jagan had that style. But James, isn't there we don't want talk, we want this, we want that attitude from the opposition?
First, in terms of aggression, I don't think the opposition is aggressive. You would agree with me too, Freddie. I mean, we haven't seen a proliferation of street protests or a bombardment on the fragment society by the opposition. So I don't think the opposition is aggressive. They may not be aggressive enough, but you could be aggressive in terms of advocating for your people. You could be aggressive in terms of dialogue. So in terms of, I don't think and I don't want to, I can't, let me just be, I think it's emancipate myself. The opposition is not aggressive enough. And this is not about street protests. This is not about violence. I mean, it's about getting
people's agenda,
putting your constituencies and your peoples, the people who vote for you, all Guyanese. This is not about Afro-Guyanese. But I mean, we know emancipation subject, but this is it very clearly. The agenda of all Guyanese is not being aggressively pushed by the opposition. That is my estimation. You saw the lines for the $200,000 grant.
But Freddie was not part. You weren't part of that.
I wish I was. Was I?
No.
That grant was for what?
I saw a video. Video of so small, $200,000. And there was a long line. But here, this is what this tells me.
Should have collected that thing.
Yeah, I agree.
And start a business.
I agree, but this is what this tells me. The disparity between rich and poor is becoming greater. That's what it's telling me. You see, there's a long line of people in a small business. This is not monies for families or monies for homes. This is money for small businesses. I don't want to go collect the monies, yes, but I don't believe that long line of people have small businesses. I don't believe it. One, and two, it showed me that there is such the disparity between rich and poor is growing. It's growing. Our people, the benefits of our natural resources. I know we must be patient, but like I always say, the rich is not waiting. The top 1%, they're not waiting. They get what they got to get. Therefore, though we must enlarge this middle class. So I don't think that the opposition is aggressively enough pushing an agenda for the middle class. In terms of wages, in terms of healthcare, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of transportation, it's not being aggressively done, and the opposition could score a lot more points if it does this for the Afro-Guyanese community. Talk with the government, have a relationship, a rapport with the government to get the patrimony of the state towards its constituency. We still see people calling contractors, if you go work for the government, house slave and house negro and soup drinker. So there's this mindset that, something that the African Guyanese, the minute he goes and gets something, that he's a soup drinker, he's a house slave. And that's come from the opposition. And to me, that ought not to be. If you were thinking of empowering a people, and empowering a class of people, then you should not shudder when this person looks like you and gets whatever they have to get from the state. It's the state. It's not getting anything from the PPP. It's the state. So I have a direct problem with that. But it all comes down to, Dr. Dalgety spoke of our spirituality, etc. But I think how we're oriented is that we have an aversion to wealth. We have an aversion to acquiring stuff. It's like we're contented with to reach a plateau. We've plateaued. We think we've plateaued if we get, for example, a job, a house up. But I think there's Afro-Guyanese, they're wanting more. They're seeing, and I look at my Indian brothers and sisters, I look at my European brothers and sisters, I look at my Chinese brothers and sisters, and I see how they're succeeding. So for myself,
me, left out Portuguese anyway.
For myself, I'm like, it's not with envy. It's like I have to see what works for them, and see how I could position myself to ensure I have certain successes in these areas. We don't have enough contractors as Afro-Guyanese. We don't have enough businessmen as Afro-Guyanese. So when you see all the contracts going, there's a small pool from which to pull from. I'm great I'm happy when I see people like Stephen Jacobs getting contracts. I feel good.
Yeah.
As a black guy, as a black man, I'm gonna say Afro-Guyanese here now. I feel a sense of pride when I see, and I think Stephen is on a trip with the president right now in China. And if you saw that.
No, I didn't know that.
I saw that, and I felt proud.
The former captain of the
former cricketer.
The former captain of Ghana team is also
yes. So So whenever I see an Afro-Guyanese, a black Guyanese succeed, I feel a sense of pride.
James, I listened to what you said very carefully.
But we must be. Let me just say the opposition. I'm saying we in the opposition, because I identify as the opposition. We must be more aggressive in promoting the agenda of all Guyanese. And our base has always been predominantly Guyanese of African descent And we must ensure that at all times our base is provided for. And it is a tragedy that our base is still the poorest. Well, after the Amerindians. In Ghana, besides, there's a tragedy, greater tragedy, slavery, but I think we in the opposition must do more to correct that tragedy of where we're still struggling financially, in education, in terms of we're the most in the jails, in crime. We must take ownership of that. I mean, people want to say but we must take ownership.
Blame Indians or
no, I'm not blaming. It's not a blame game. I'm saying the response is on us. I'm not blaming a single soul here. I don't do the blame game thing.
Yes, but I mean, the responsibility say that you blame the white people for doing this.
I'm not. No, I don't blame anybody for my circumstance.
I want to jump in here. Yeah. So I listened to what you said there, James, and I disagree with you on one issue. I don't believe there's a growing divide between the rich and the poor. I believe there's a growing middle class. And I tell you what, there's a lot more people getting into business now. I had to call a central CHMP official yesterday, and I live in 7th Street, Diamond. Because the trucks are coming through my street, breaking up the roads, and I had issues about this. So I called him. I said, "What's happening? Don't you guys have a plan on how these trucks are moving through the scheme?" He says, "Gildarie, we're building 10,000 house lots at the back of Diamond right now, and that has to be done. And we need to get a sand in there, and I'm going to look at it." There are many people who are making apartments, who are involved. You got to see them, who are subcontracting and getting into that. But it's an argument that would have to come from figures that is on the ground, and I don't think we have all those figures yet. But I'm telling you what I'm seeing on the ground. You're a businessman. I'm also involved in a little business, and I'm living right in the midst of it. What is happening around the East Bank? I think the East Coast is going to happen, and I think we only got a few minutes. But I want to ask you, gentlemen, three programs. I hear in America all the time politicians talking about inner city programs. I want to ask you guys to give us 3 programs that, whether you're a politician or a Guyanese, that you would say to the government there finally, this is what I want you to do specifically for the Afro-Guyanese to elevate them from one state to the next state. Starting with you, Tom.
You see, I mean, I have tried to touch this evening on the spiritual aspects of culture, okay? If you ask me what things, physical things...
That's 3.
Let me say something that just flashed through my mind, okay? People have difficulty passing maths exams, let's say, right? You go around Georgetown here, and I see they call, for example, in thing, a circle, a square. And I get mad that on say these mathematical symbols have. For example, this just along here, there's an oblong, but it doesn't recognize it as an oblong. And I think because you see, when I lived in Europe for 9 years, okay, Trafalgar Square is a square. I went to university, a rectangle is a rectangle, but you don't find that here. Therefore, I think that thinking, that mental thinking that that Bob Marley wrote about, sang about, I think that has to be corrected. One, that on that spiritual aspect of culture, right? 2, you asked me 3 things, huh?
3 things. You have the opportunity now. If you're looking at this program, these are 3 things that the boys want you to give them tomorrow morning.
To the thing, the matter of the symbolism, I say street names has to be changed because we have no connection with Africa. You know, that's why I brought that thing to show you the thing with Rose Street. The other 2 things is technology, right? I have been in science and technology.
This program is going and time is running, but people should know you were here before. You were one of the successful African businessmen in the 70s and 80s. You used to manufacture potty.
Yes, and I find that we don't use sign.
Without the money you made, you those things. Anyway,
you know, the matter of technology is important, okay? In terms of, I mean, I've been reading how China developed because of technology. Mm-hmm. You know, when they talk of joint programs, it has to do with technology, you know? And the other thing is probably land distribution. You know.
Well, our time has come. So, James,
Education, money, and crime. Education, money, crime. I think a direct focus, a greater focus on education in Afro-Guyanese communities. A greater
what sort of education are you talking about?
Not just the formal education, a rounded education.
I know of two types.
Yeah.
Education that has to do with the power, and education has to do with inquisitiveness.
Yeah. Education, first and foremost. The second one is financial management, money matters. Must be greater focus in terms of access to loans, etc. And the second one is criminal justice reform. I think the criminal justice system is doing a great disservice to young African Guyanese.
Tragedy. It's a tragedy.
We must. I think when it was the first year in Parliament, I did a budget speech where they proposed. I think they're going to come to it sooner or later. Do you know how much man hours we waste with this 72 hours nonsense? You know, lock up somebody and throw them in jail for 72 hours without proper investigation, I think, and automatically open a doorway for criminal activity, a criminal mindset. You know, by just picking up someone and throwing them in jail. We need criminal justice reform in terms of possession of marijuana. That's something that bothers me today, that we're still...
A man got 4 years today for that.
Yeah, but
a guy killed 2 people in a robbery and got 36 months.
Imagine the first world countries that started this war on drugs. They've monetized the use of cannabis sativa. They're now making that's $1 billion industry in the U.S. now, in Colorado and these states. Yeah, and they've waged a war on drugs, and the third world countries, we're still locking up people and harassing people and kicking down doors and having kids grow up without mothers and fathers for marijuana. The first world countries are selling in pharmacies and cannabis shops.
Well, one of the things you should tell the people too is to stop having 10 child mothers.
Well, that goes to family. That's why I said when I mentioned family. I agree with you 100%. Family. We must get back to family values.
The operators in my ear. I know we would not have gotten all that we wanted. Before we go, Tom, are you going to the park tomorrow? James, are you going?
Yes, I always go.
I have been around African people a long time, and I must say that is one of the most colorful dashikis I have ever seen.
I think Aubrey Norton has one too, something similar.
Aubrey Norton can't be more colorful than James Bond.
I'm not saying he has.
You know who's 007? That man has a license to perform. It was interesting me having my old friend here and the controversial, outspoken James Bond, my co-host Leonard Gildarie. I know we would not have got in the hour, but we did. And unfortunately, James Bond has ended the show on a negative note. I just looked across and see, unlike the three of us, he didn't finish his conky. But we'll see you later. So now, on behalf of Gildarie,
good one.
Bye-bye. Catch you later.
And thanks for having me again.
Yes.